It's most likely a smallmouth shoal bass hybrid. Oh my. Did you all see that? Well, hello there and welcome to the channel, everyone. I know it's been a while since I've posted a video and I apologize for that. It's not because I haven't been fishing, I just wasn't able to make a video from those trips for a couple of different reasons. The first trip I was actually fishing with another YouTube angler, Marshall from Georgia Bassmaster, who's trying to complete the Georgia Bass Slam. He was targeting the red-eye bass and the Tallapoosa bass, but we had some pretty tough conditions thanks to a few scattered thunderstorms the night before. Anyway, the water was stained and rising the day we fished, so I didn't fish much or wear a camera. If you'd like to see video from the trip or check out the Georgia Bassmaster channel, I'll put a link in the description below. I highly recommend it. Marshall's not only a great angler, he does product reviews, challenge videos. His channel has a little bit of everything, and he's a great person on top of that. He didn't have to mention my channel or post a link to it, but he did, and I really appreciate that. Well, today we're fishing a place I drive past all the time, usually on my way to fish somewhere else. That place is the Chattahoochee River below Morgan Falls Dam. Today we're targeting the shoal bass, which is native to the Chattahoochee River drainage. It's one of 3 native species of black bass. You have the Chattahoochee bass, which is the upland species, the shoal bass, and the largemouth. Those are the only 3 native black bass in the Chattahoochee River drainage. The Chattahoochee bass are locally extinct, and they have been for a long time, so we're not going to see any Chattahoochee bass today. 3 non-native species of black bass have been introduced to the Chattahoochee River drainage. Spotted bass native to the Mississippi River basin were first documented above the fall line of the Chattahoochee River in 1968. And Alabama bass native to the Mobile River basin were illegally introduced to Lake Lanier in the 1970s. Those fish actually pass through Buford Dam and make their way all the way downriver to Bull Sluice Lake in Roswell. And from there they pass over and through Morgan Falls Dam. So non-native Alabama bass and spotted bass have been in the Chattahoochee River below Morgan Falls Dam for the last 30 years. Then around 20 years ago, smallmouth bass were illegally introduced to the Chattahoochee River below Morgan Falls Dam. Smallmouth bass have also been found more recently above Morgan Falls Dam. Now I want to talk about native species of black bass for a minute. No drainage in the world has more than 3 native species of black bass. The Mobile River Basin has 6 species of black bass, but each drainage in the Mobile Basin only has 3 species. You have an upland species, an intermediate species, which is the Alabama bass, and then you have the largemouth bass. You never find more than 3 native species of black bass in a drainage because there's really only 3 distinct ecoregions. You have an upland or mountain region, a Piedmont region, and the coastal plain. Native species diverge as they adapt to different conditions unique to these environments. This process promotes reproductive isolation as native species develop different life histories, traits, and behaviors over long periods of time. But when humans start moving fish around, these natural barriers to reproduction no longer exist, resulting in widespread hybridization between species. And that's exactly what's happening in the Chattahoochee River. Biologists routinely find about half of the fish they sample are some kind of hybrid black bass. Most studies have shown there's a growing population of hybrids with highly variable characteristics ranging widely between the 4 parent types: shoal bass, smallmouth bass, Alabama bass, and spotted bass. Every year I seem to catch more and more fish that look like hybrids and fewer fish that resemble actual species. And what's happening below Morgan Falls Dam could be the future if humans don't stop moving bass around. No species, just a population of hybrid black bass with highly variable characteristics anglers will call bass. If you haven't been able to tell, I really like using a topwater as some kind of search bait. You know, in different situations, the lure you know, if I'm throwing at a lot of cover along the bank, a lot of bushes and trees hanging over the water, like a single hook lure, like a buzzbait, or some kind of buzz frog. If I'm fishing out in open water, you know, I will throw a top water with some kind of treble hooks on it, you know, a whopper flopper, skitter prop, spook, some type of chugging bait, you know, like a storm chug bug or something like that. I will throw a spook at the bank, but when you have current, it can be a real headache, you know, and it can be also kind of dangerous too, depending on the situation. If you're in a kayak and the water's moving at a pretty good pace, and I will fish a single hook lure in open water, but you know, as far as when I'm kind of in this search mode, I'm really fishing it kind of quick. I'm not always paying attention to the lure. A lot of times I'm trying to process the area. I'm scanning the area. I'm trying to, you know, process the water and figure out where the fish are at. So I'm not always staring at my lure all the time. And if I get bit on the surface lure, on the top water plug or whatever, I'll throw a soft plastic in there. I've found a lot of really good areas that way. And if you're familiar with the area, if you know the stream you're fishing, if you know the creek or river you're fishing, you probably already know where the fish are at, so you don't really need to throw a search bait. You can just go ahead and throw your soft plastic in there. But I'm not real familiar with this section I'm fishing today. One of the reasons I avoid it is because there's usually a lot of tubers and people out here using the river later in the day. And not only that, but there's a lot of hybrids. You know, when the DNR biologists electrofish this section, half the fish they sample are some kind of black bass hybrid. And it would probably be higher than that if the DNR hadn't been stocking shoal bass since 2003. I think between 2003 and 2019, they've stocked 250,000 shoal bass fingerlings in this section. And that's to supplement the natural reproduction. But there are a lot of hybrids. They haven't said this or mentioned it, I don't think, online. But my hope is that those stocked fish will kind of swamp out, or you know, there we go. Let's see what we got here. That's a shoal bass. Well, I say it's a shoal bass. He's kind of, the markings, hopefully I can land this fish. I hate pulling them. I got this stiff rod and okay. On the old super spook. I don't have my pliers out, but I just got it. It's okay. This fish, shoal bass typically do not have, I don't know if you can see this, but let me turn this fish. Shoal bass typically have very little pigment in their pelvic fins, but this fish, he's also got a really tiny mouth. I'm thinking this is some kind of, it's most likely a smallmouth shoal bass hybrid. I was going to say shoal bass typically have very little pigment in these pelvic fins here, but this fish was in this grass. There's some pondweed and some hydrilla out here. It might be LOD, I'm not real sure, but these fish hold in this grass. The grass folds over in the current and they sit under it, and that's why this fish is so dark. So that pigment, in the pelvic fin there could be because of where this fish was holding, under that grass. But he's also got some bluish coloration here, which you typically do not see with the shoal bass. That's more of a smallmouth trait. That almost turquoise, bluish green coloration there. That's more of a smallmouth trait. But the tail is also kind of more forked like a smallmouth. Shoal bass typically have more rounded caudal fin lobes. So I'm thinking this is a hybrid. This is a smallmouth shoal bass hybrid. I'm not going to put him on the board, but I probably shouldn't release this fish. But I'm sure a lot of people will, well, it just shook out of my hand, so I typically do not release those. People say, oh, it's just one fish. One fish won't make a difference. But what they don't realize is that next spring when these fish spawn, if that's a male, it's going to spawn with maybe 3 or 4. It could potentially spawn with 3 or 4 female shoal bass. So, you're talking about thousands of additional hybrids from that. Not only that, but those female shoal bass that spawn with that non-native species or that hybrid, they're not going to, you're not going to have any shoal bass reproduction from that. But if you remove that fish from the system, then those shoal bass, those female shoal bass, at least have an opportunity to spawn with a legit shoal bass and produce shoal bass. Whereas if you just left that fish in the system, it may, it's just going to cause problems. So that's my take on it. Again, I'm not a biologist, but that's my opinion on that. A lot of people fish this section of the river. I think if everybody kept those hybrids, we'd all be a lot better off in those shoal bass at the DNR stocks. They would have a much bigger impact. But I understand a lot of anglers aren't real familiar with or might not be real confident in their ability to ID the hybrids, and that's fine. Oh man, he's still on there. He's got me in that grass. I'm pulling him across that grass. It lays over in the current, y'all. So when you pull a fish at an angle like this, when they get in one of those grass clumps, you kind of have to just hold them. Yeah, this looks like a largemouth, which is kind of typical. No, it's not a largemouth. It's a freaking, looks like an Alabama bass, y'all. Okay. All right. And I will not be releasing this fish. Got the front treble in his mouth, so this fish was really aggressive. I didn't even move the bait. But you know, this is some kind of hybrid, most likely. A lot of the bass that the DNR samples, again from this section, the fish that most anglers would call this a spotted bass, and this fish is most likely a spotted Alabama hybrid. And a lot of people ask me, you know, well, how do you tell the difference? You know, well, the truth is that when they both are in the same system, you really can't tell the difference, because once they start to back cross, they can resemble parent species, and genetics are really the only way to at that point to figure out what kind of hybrid you have exactly. Again, this fish could even have some shoal bass genetics, you know, without taking a fin clip, you know, and sending it off to the lab. There's no way to really know. There's another non-native spotted bass. Yeah, and that's most likely a spotted bass or a spotted Alabama hybrid. Boy, that one just barely got it. Is he foul hooked? Yeah, he's foul hooked. It's the target species, though. Now this one, this could be a hybrid, but it looks more like a shoal bass, and it has all of the traits that are, you know, more typical of a shoal bass. If you look at the lobes of the caudal fin, they're a lot more rounded than they were on that first fish. I don't know if you can see that, but the lobes, the upper and the lower lobe, it's more rounded. And also the blotches are a little bigger. You also have more white on the ventral surface or the belly here. It's more, you know, the coloration, it fades to a white belly here. And also if we look at the pelvic fins here, they're kind of a white or translucent color. There's no pigment there, you know. And the mouth is a little larger. I know we didn't we didn't really shut the mouth on that first one. But this fish looks more like a shoal bass. It's also, the markings are kind of faded because he was foul hooked. He's stressed, but he's got a little basicaudal spot there. It's just kind of a square blotch at the base of the caudal fin. You can't really see it, but it's there. And I'm going to get him back in the water. But I'm fairly certain that this is a shoal bass. Oh my, did you all see that? Throwing the wacky in there. I think that fish felt the sting of the that's not the same one. But that's why you keep the wacky rig handy. It's not the same fish, but a lot of times there's more than one. It's a nice shoal bass, or a solid, you know, keeper. It's not a big one, but that first one was probably the boss hog. You know what? I gotta get out. Let me get out right here. I got a lot going on. Let's see here. Okay. All right, this fish looks more like a shoal bass. Let me turn around so the sun is on him. Okay, here we go. Here you can see that again, those caudal fin lobes are rounded there, and the coloration, you know, fades to a white belly. The ventral surface there is white, and the fish has a fairly large mouth, you know, and again, the markings aren't real super distinct, but the markings are more typical of a shoal bass. And the body coloration overall is more like a shoal bass. There he goes. That's a good one if he stays pegged. Not a big one, but it's a solid one. Maybe the biggest one I've caught today. Of course, it just buried up in some grass. This looks like a shoal bass. I don't know, it's not the biggest one today, but it's a pretty decent one. And that appears to be a mostly shoal bass. I don't know. Now that I say that, the blotches, the markings are kind of crazy, but that could just be individual variation. But mostly shoal bass, I'd say. See ya. This fish appears to be have more smallmouth genetics. You can see the brown pigment in the anal fin there and the pelvic fin. To see the brown coloration, and there's a little bit. When I first caught him, there was more, but he's kind of got this brown amber pigment in his pelvic fin, and he's got that white spine. The pelvic fin spine is kind of white, and then you got that brown pigment. That's kind of a smallmouth feature, but I'd say there's a good chance this is a hybrid.